Daniel had been looking forward to this weekend for months. Work had been stressful. His phone never seemed to stop buzzing, and his small apartment in the city felt more like a storage room than a home. The only place he truly felt at peace was the little cabin by the lake that his father had built years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it had a warm wooden porch, a creaky screen door, a view of the water that could make anyone forget their worries. He had inherited it when his father passed away, and even though life had gotten busy, he always made sure to keep it in good condition. Sometimes he'd go there to fish. Sometimes he'd just sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the gentle waves and the wind in the trees. It was his safe place, his escape from everything. This weekend he wanted nothing more than to wake up to the sound of birds, cook breakfast in the small kitchen, and maybe take the canoe out into the lake. He packed his truck with groceries, his fishing gear, and a few books. The drive out of the city took almost 3 hours, but he didn't mind. The air seemed to get cleaner the farther he got from the traffic and noise. When he turned onto the narrow gravel road that led to the lake community, he smiled. The familiar tall pine trees swayed gently above, and the sunlight danced on the road through their branches. He passed a few other cabins, some with people sitting outside, others with cars parked in the driveway. Everyone here usually kept to themselves, though he knew most of his neighbors by face. But when he reached the spot where his cabin should have been waiting quietly for him, his smile slowly faded. His truck rolled to a stop, and for a moment, he thought he had taken the wrong turn. The first thing he noticed was a bright blue SUV in the driveway. It was definitely not his. The second thing was the porch. It didn't look the same. The old rocking chair his father had built was gone. The curtains in the windows were a completely different color, and scattered in the grass near the porch were bright plastic toys, a little red wagon, deflated beach ball, and a tiny bicycle. His heart started pounding. This didn't make sense. No one was supposed to be here. He turned off the engine and stepped out slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. Every step toward the cabin made him feel more uneasy. He climbed the steps onto the porch, noticing that even the welcome mat had been replaced. He reached for the doorknob, but before his hand touched it, the door swung open. A woman stood there, holding a coffee mug. She was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't feel friendly. She looked him up and down like he was a stranger who had just wandered into the wrong house. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool and a little too firm. Daniel blinked. "Yes. This is my cabin. Who are you?" The woman tilted her head and laughed lightly, though there was no real humor in it. "Your cabin? I think you're mistaken. This belongs to my son now." For a second, Daniel thought he had misheard her. "Your son? I think there's been some sort of mix-up. I own this cabin. My name's Daniel Moore. I've had it for years." "Oh, I know exactly who you are," she interrupted, still holding that strange smile. "I'm Kieran. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association here. This cabin was declared abandoned and reassigned to my son Tyler. He's the rightful owner now." Daniel felt like the ground had tilted under his feet. Abandoned. That's impossible. Was here just last summer. My name is still on the deed. Never. Karen cut him off again. "You didn't respond to the notices? We sent you several letters about unpaid maintenance fees. You never paid them. So the property was claimed according to HOA rules. It's all perfectly legal." Daniel's voice grew sharper. "I never got any letters. Not one. And you can't just give someone's house away because of some fake fees. This is my cabin, and you need to get out." Karen's smile faded just enough for her real expression to show a mix of irritation and smugness. "You'll have to take it up with the board, but let me warn you, you won't get far. Tyler has already moved in, and we're making improvements. This place was falling apart." Daniel glanced past her into the cabin. The furniture had been moved around. His father's old fishing trophies were nowhere to be seen. There was a strange smell, like too much perfume mixed with fresh paint. He could hear footsteps from inside. Someone else was in there, probably Tyler. He turned back to Karen, his jaw tight. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he stepped down from the porch and walked back to his truck. He could feel her eyes on his back the whole way. It's like she was daring him to turn around and argue. Inside the truck, he sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. His cabin, his father's place, gone just like that, because some HOA president decided she could give it to her own son. The thought made his stomach turn. But the more he thought about it, the more one thing became clear. He wasn't going to let this go. He started the engine and drove toward the HOA office, his mind already working through his next steps. If Karen wanted to play games, she was about to find out she picked the wrong person to mess with. Daniel drove straight to the small HOA office at the edge of the lake community. It was a low, beige building with a wooden sign out front, looking harmless enough from the outside, but he already knew that what happened inside would be anything but friendly when he walked through the glass door, as the cool air conditioning hit him, along with the smell of old carpet and coffee. A woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. She had a polite but tired face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "I need to speak to the board about my cabin. There's been a serious mistake." She typed something into her computer, then looked up again. "They're in a meeting right now. I can see if they'll let you in." A minute later, she waved him through. Daniel stepped into a small conference room with a long table. At least 6 people sat around it, papers and coffee cups scattered in front of them. At the head of the table was Karen, looking far too comfortable. In her chair, she didn't seem at all surprised to see him. In fact, she smiled like she had been expecting him. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Moore," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Come to discuss the new ownership arrangements." Daniel ignored her tone and pulled out a chair. "I came to get my property back. You've made a huge mistake. My cabin is not abandoned. My name is still on the deed, and I never received. Any notice about these so-called unpaid fees?" Karen gave a little shrug. "We followed procedure. Letters were mailed to the address we have on file. If you didn't get them, that's not our problem." "What address?" Daniel asked sharply. She opened a folder, flipped through some papers, and read off an address Daniel hadn't lived at in over 5 years. He sat back, realizing instantly what had happened. "You knew I don't live there anymore," he said. "I updated my address with you the year after my dad passed away." Karen's expression didn't change. "We used the information in our records." Daniel's eyes scanned the table. Some board members were looking down at their papers. A man with gray hair shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while a woman in a blue sweater bit her lip. It was clear they weren't all on Karen's side, but none of them were speaking up. "Let's be clear," Daniel continued. "You can't just give away someone's home because of a missed bill, especially not when that bill is fake. My taxes are paid. My utilities are paid. I've never once been late on anything related to that property. So why don't you tell me the real reason my cabin is suddenly your son's?" Karen's smile returned, tighter this time. "My son needed a place by the lake. The HOA has the right to reassign abandoned or neglected properties. It's in the bylaws. I've already given him possession, and he's making improvements. This conversation is over." Daniel leaned forward. Not even close to over. "Want to see a copy of those bylaws? Every record of the fees you claim I owe? And proof that you had the legal right to do this?" The gray-haired man at the table finally cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe we should Karen," cut him off sharply. "This is not the time, Richard." The board already voted. Daniel sat back in his chair, watching her carefully. Just confident, she was cocky, like she believed there was no way he could undo what she'd done. That meant either she thought she was protected, or she had done this before and gotten away with it. The door to the conference room opened, and in walked a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 20s. He wore a baseball cap backward and had the kind of swagger that came from never hearing the word no. "Hey, Mom," he said, glancing at Daniel with a smirk. "Is this the guy who's crying about losing his cabin?" Karen smiled warmly. "Adam, Tyler, this is Mr. Moore. He's having trouble accepting change." Daniel stood up slowly. "You're the one who thinks my cabin is yours?" Tyler stepped closer, just enough to be irritating. "Not thinks, knows. I've already moved in. Got some big plans for the place. Gonna knock down that old porch and put in a deck with a hot tub. Maybe even rent it out on weekends for extra cash." Every word made Daniel's blood boil. kept his voice calm though his jaw was clenched. "You might want to hold off on those plans. You're not keeping that cabin." Tyler chuckled. "We'll see about that." Daniel grabbed his bag and headed for the door. He didn't bother saying goodbye. He knew there was no point in arguing further, not here, not with Karen running the show. Once outside, he took a deep breath and walked to his truck. The warm sun felt like nothing compared to the fire in his chest. He wasn't just dealing with some misunderstanding. This was a deliberate setup. Instead of heading back to the city, he drove straight to the county courthouse. It was an old red brick building in the middle of town with wide stone steps leading up to heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and dust. The records office was down a long hallway. A clerk behind the counter greeted him and asked what he needed. "I want to see the property records for a cabin in the Lakewood Pines community," Daniel said, giving her the address. She typed quickly, then disappeared into the back for a few minutes, and she returned. She had a stack of papers in her hand. Daniel sat at a small table and began to go through them carefully. The first page was the deed, his name, clear as day, still listed as the sole owner. No transfer, no foreclosure, no lien. The taxes were marked as paid in full for the current year. He flipped through more papers, utility records, county notices, all of them showing nothing wrong with his ownership. There was absolutely no sign of any legal change in who owned the property. A slow, determined smile crept onto his face. Karen had nothing real to stand on. Everything she'd done was HOA smoke and mirrors. He neatly stacked the papers and asked the clerk for certified copies. She stamped them and slid them across the counter. As he tucked them into his bag, he already knew his next move. He wasn't going to storm back to the cabin yelling. That would give them what they wanted, an emotional reaction. No, this was going to be different. If they wanted to play games, he would play smarter. He would gather proof, find witnesses, and hit them where it hurt. And when the time was right, they wouldn't just give the cabin back, they would wish they'd never tried to take it in the first place. Daniel walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. He paused for a moment, taking in the quiet of the small town. His father had always told him, "The calm before the storm is when you make your best moves." And that's exactly what Daniel planned to do. Daniel drove back toward the lake community, but he didn't go to his cabin. He wasn't ready to confront Karen and Tyler yet. He needed to prepare himself and make sure every move he made would count. This wasn't just about getting his cabin back anymore. This was about teaching them a lesson they wouldn't forget. The first thing he did was park his truck on a side road near the lake and take out his phone. He began taking pictures from a distance, shots of the cabin, the driveway, and even the bright blue SUV that Tyler had parked there. He zoomed in on the curtains, the porch, the toys scattered in the grass. Every detail could be useful later. Once he had enough photos, he walked down the road toward the next cabin over. The older man was sitting on a porch swing, slowly rocking back and forth. His silver hair glistened in the sunlight, and he had the calm look of someone who had lived there for decades. "Afternoon," Daniel called out. The man looked up and smiled faintly. "Afternoon, you must be the Moore boy. Haven't seen you here in a while." Daniel climbed the porch steps and shook the man's hand. "Mr. Harris, right?" "That's me," the man said. "Your dad and I used to fish together." Daniel nodded. "I wish I was here under better circumstances." "Have you noticed anyone around my cabin lately?" Mr. Harris's smile faded. He looked toward Daniel's cabin and shook his head slowly. "Yeah, I've seen some things. That HOA president Karen, she's trouble, always has been. We're down to... Then one day her son shows up with a truck full of furniture. Just moved right in." Daniel felt a rush of anger but kept his voice steady. "Has she done anything like this before?" Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair. "More times than I can count. She scares people into selling cheap or just leaving. Most folks don't have the money or energy to fight her. She's been running this place like her own kingdom for years. Would you be willing to tell that to someone official if needed?" Daniel asked. Mr. Harris hesitated, glancing toward the cabin again. "Karen's got friends here, people who owe her favors. But if your dad was a good man, I'd do it for him. Just be careful, son. She doesn't like losing." Daniel thanked him, then went to speak with a few other neighbors he trusted. The stories were all the same. Karen was a bully who twisted HOA rules to suit herself. One woman told him Karen had fined her $200 for having a non-regulation birdhouse. Another man said she once ordered him to cut down a tree because she claimed it spoiled the lake view for her guests. By the time Daniel finished his conversations, he had a clearer picture of who he was dealing with. Karen was used to winning because most people either gave in or moved away. But he wasn't going anywhere. That night, Daniel drove back to the city and called a property attorney named Mark Reynolds. He explained everything: the fake fees, the wrong mailing address, the fact that his name was still on the deed. Mark listened quietly, then said, "From what you're telling me, this isn't just an HOA issue. It's trespassing, possibly fraud, and certainly overreach of authority. You've got a strong case, but we'll need to be smart about it. Get as much evidence as you can before you make your next move." Daniel agreed. The next morning, he returned to the cabin area with a plan. Instead of trying to break in or confront them, he was going to hit them with something legal, something they couldn't argue against. He started by going to the local zoning office to check on property boundaries. A friendly clerk pulled up a map of the lake community and showed Daniel exactly where his property lines were. He noticed something interesting. The cabin's backyard went all the way to a narrow strip of land right along the lake. If he put up a fence there, it would completely block the back door of the cabin from accessing the water. And since the fence would be on his property, no one could stop him. Daniel left the zoning office with a certified copy of his property map and went straight to a hardware store. He spent the afternoon talking with a fencing contractor, explaining what he wanted: a tall, sturdy fence with a locked gate, placed exactly along his property line. The contractor raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? It's going to cut off the best part of that cabin?" Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the idea." He set the installation date for the following week. That gave him time to prepare and to make sure every single permit and document was ready. So Karen couldn't claim he was breaking any rules. In the meantime, Daniel kept a low profile. He didn't visit the cabin directly, but he drove past a few times to see what was happening. He noticed Tyler outside once, tossing a football in the yard with a friend, laughing loudly. Another time, Karen was on the porch talking on her phone with a clipboard in hand, like she was running some kind of business from there. Daniel could have marched up and demanded they leave, but that would have been too easy for them to spin into a disturbance complaint. Instead, he stayed in the background, patient and focused. He spent his evenings organizing his evidence photos, copies of the deed, neighbor statements, and even screenshots of social media posts. One of the neighbors had shown him a post Tyler made bragging about his new lake cabin and how the HOA is the best when your mom's the president. That one screenshot alone made Daniel's case even stronger. By the end of the week, Daniel had a thick folder of proof. His attorney was impressed when he saw it. "You've done your homework," Mark said. "Once that fence goes up, we'll file the paperwork. They'll be forced to either back off or face legal consequences." Daniel nodded. "I'm ready for both." The night before the fence installation, Daniel drove out to the cabin area again, just to see the place one more time before things changed. The moonlight shimmered on the lake, and for a moment, he felt the peace he used to feel here. Imagine sitting on the porch again, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the water. But then he thought about Karen's smug smile and Tyler's arrogant laugh. The peaceful feeling faded. That fence wasn't just a barrier, it was going to be a message. The next morning, he woke up early, feeling more energized than he had in weeks. The fencing crew was meeting him at the cabin at sunrise. Karen and Tyler had no idea what was coming. The sun was just beginning to rise when Daniel's truck rolled quietly into the driveway of his cabin. The air was cool, the sky painted with shades of pink and orange. Behind him, a flatbed truck followed, loaded with tall wooden panels, metal, posts, and rolls of chain link. Two workers in heavy boots stepped down, stretching their arms and yawning. Daniel greeted them with a firm handshake and pointed to the backyard. "We're putting it right here, along this line, no gaps. Solid and high." The men nodded and began unloading their tools. Hammers, drills, and shovels clinked and clattered in the quiet morning. Daniel could already picture the final result: a tall, locked fence, cutting right across the property line. Blocking the back of the cabin from the lake, it didn't take long for the noise to wake the people inside. A curtain twitched in one of the windows, then a shadow moved quickly toward the door. The front door swung open, and Karen stepped out in a bathrobe, her hair messy from sleep. "Pleased? What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Daniel turned toward her slowly, his expression calm. "I'm putting up a fence. It's my property. I have the permit." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You can't do that. This blocks our access to the lake." Daniel didn't even blink. "No. It blocks my access to the lake you've been using. My property without permission, that ends today." She crossed her arms, her voice rising. "This is harassment. You can't just come here," and Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it to her. "That's my deed. My name is still on it." This he pulled out another document, is the city-approved permit for this fence. "Everything I'm doing here is legal." Karen's face twitched when she saw the documents. Her fingers tightened around the papers. She looked like she wanted to tear them in half, but instead she shoved them back at him. "This isn't over," she snapped. "It is for today," Daniel replied, as if on cue. One of the workers started up a power drill, the loud buzz cutting through the tension. Kieran spun around and stomped back inside. For a few minutes, all Daniel heard was the sound of tools and the steady rhythm of shovels hitting dirt. Then the door burst open again. This time it was Tyler. He came out wearing sweatpants and no shirt, looking like he'd just been woken up. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched as Tyler stormed across the yard toward him, fists clenched. "This is my place now," Tyler said, his voice rising with each word. "You're not putting up some ugly fence and ruining the view?" Daniel looked him in the eye, his voice steady. "Your name isn't on the deed. Mine is. I can do whatever I want with my property." Tyler laughed coldly. "You think you're smart? Fine. I'll just knock it down after you leave." Daniel smiled faintly. "Go ahead. I'll have you arrested for vandalism. Since I have all the permits, the law will be on my side." Tyler glared at him but didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the workers and shouted, "Stop! You can't do this." One of the workers looked up from his drill and shrugged. "We've got a signed work order from the owner. That's him," pointed at Daniel. Tyler's face flushed red, but he backed off, muttering curses under his breath. He stomped back inside, slamming the door so hard that one of the windows rattled. Daniel let out a slow breath. It felt good to finally take action, to make a visible physical statement that the cabin was his. The workers kept going, setting posts into the ground, checking the measurements twice. Daniel walked the perimeter with them, making sure every inch was within the legal property lines. By mid-morning, the fence was starting to take shape. Its tall wooden panels rose from the ground, sturdy and close together, so no one could see through. The chain-link portion stretched across the center, reinforced with metal posts that wouldn't budge. At one end, a heavy gate with a brand-new lock clicked into place. Only Daniel had the key, from inside the cabin. Daniel could hear muffled voices, Karen and Tyler talking, their tone low but tense. Once or twice the curtains moved, and he caught a glimpse of their faces peeking out. Just after noon, Karen came out again, her tone now softer, almost pleading. "Daniel, can we talk for a minute? Maybe we can work something out." Daniel didn't stop watching the workers. "I'm listening." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There's no need for all this drama. If you just pay the fees and sign the transfer papers, Tyler could keep the place, and we could all get along." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Not going to happen. I'm not signing anything. This cabin is mine, and you've been trespassing. After today, if either of you step foot past this fence, I'll have you arrested." Away again, replaced by that cold, calculating glare. "You'll regret this," she said. "I doubt it," Daniel replied. By late afternoon, the fence was finished. The workers packed up their tools and loaded the flatbed truck. Daniel walked the length of the fence one last time, running his hand along the smooth wood and sturdy metal. It felt solid, like a wall between him and the chaos Karen had brought into his life. When the workers drove away, Daniel locked the gate with a heavy padlock. He stepped back and looked at the cabin. Karen was standing in the window, her arms crossed, her eyes like daggers. Tyler stood behind her, his jaw tight. Daniel gave them one last look, not angry, just calm, then turned and walked to his truck. As he drove away, he knew they were fuming. But there was nothing they could do without breaking the law. That night, Daniel got a few calls from angry HOA members. One accused him of being selfish and ruining the community spirit. Another warned him that Karen was going to make things very difficult for him. Daniel didn't argue. He simply told them, if anyone has a problem, they can take it up with my lawyer, and he hung up. As he sat at home later, sipping coffee, he thought about how far things had come in just a week. Karen had tried to take his cabin quietly, expecting him to roll over like everyone else. Instead, he'd taken back control, one fence panel at a time, and this was just the beginning. Daniel didn't waste time after the fence went up. The very next morning, he met with his lawyer, Mark Reynolds, at a small office downtown. The folder Daniel had been building for days now sat thick and heavy on the desk between them. Mark flipped through the papers, nodding slowly as he read. This is exactly what we need. Deed records, certified copies, permit approvals, neighbor statements. This isn't just a case, Daniel. This is a win. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'm tired of her thinking she can walk all over. People, I want this on record. I want her to answer for everything she's done. Mark closed the folder with a quiet thump. Then we'll file today. Trespassing, attempted fraudulent property seizure, harassment, and damages. She'll have to respond in court, and trust me, she won't like it. They spent the next hour going over every detail, making sure nothing was missing. Daniel signed the paperwork, and Mark promised to submit it to the county courthouse. That afternoon, 2 days later, Karen and Tyler received official notices at the cabin. Daniel wasn't there to see it, but a neighbor later told him Karen had come storming out onto the porch, waving the papers in the air and yelling into her phone.
Ow.
Tyler had paced up and down the driveway like a caged animal, muttering curses. Tension around the lake community grew quickly. People were talking, and not just about the fence anymore. Stories about Karen's past actions began to surface. Some residents had been too afraid to speak up before, but now that Daniel had taken a stand, they started to share their own experiences. One woman told the local paper that Karen had fined her $500 for unauthorized holiday decorations. Another man said Karen once tried to have his shed removed because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Even though he'd had it for 15 years, it didn't take long for the story to catch the attention of a local news reporter named Sarah Brooks. She called Daniel one evening and asked if he'd be willing to talk. I'm not looking for fame, Daniel said carefully. But if this helps stop her from doing it to someone else, I'll do it. The interview happened 2 days later. Sarah met Daniel by the lake, her cameraman setting up shots of the cabin and the new fence. Daniel kept his answers simple and honest. He explained how he'd inherited the cabin from his father, how Karen had claimed it was abandoned, and how her son had moved in without any legal right. Sarah also spoke with Mr. Harris, who didn't hold back. She's been running this place like a personal business for years, he said. If you don't do what she wants, she makes your life miserable. But this time, she messed with the wrong man. When the news segment aired that night, it spread faster than Daniel expected. People in nearby towns started sharing the story online. Comments poured in, with most siding strongly with Daniel. Some even called for Karen to be removed from her position immediately. The pressure worked. Within a week, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Karen still tried to act confident, but it was clear her grip on power was slipping. Several board members who had stayed silent before now openly questioned her actions. The man with gray hair, Richard, finally spoke up. This isn't just about one cabin, he said during the meeting. This is about years of abuse of authority. I think it's time for a change in leadership. The vote was swift, and Karen was removed as president of the HOA. The decision was announced in a short, tense statement to the community, and Karen left the meeting without speaking to anyone. Losing her position didn't mean she was off the hook legally. The lawsuit was still moving forward, and her removal from the HOA only strengthened Daniel's case. Faced with mounting legal fees and bad publicity, Karen's lawyer eventually reached out to Mark to discuss a settlement. The offer was simple. Karen and Tyler would sign a formal agreement stating they had no ownership rights to the cabin. They would vacate immediately, and they would never set foot on Daniel's property again. In return, Daniel would drop the claim for financial damages. Daniel considered it for a moment, then agreed. He wasn't doing this for the money, just wanted his cabin back and his peace restored. 2 days later, Tyler's blue SUV was gone. From the driveway, Daniel arrived at the cabin to find the porch empty, the curtains open, and the inside cleared of their belongings. The air smelled faintly of dust and fresh wood. Nothing like the perfume and paint scent remembered from before. He walked slowly through each room, making sure everything was in place. His father's fishing trophies were still gone, but that was a battle he could let go. The important thing was that the cabin was his again, free of unwanted guests. That evening, Daniel sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sunset reflect off the lake. The fence stood tall and solid behind him, a quiet reminder of the fight he'd had to win. Mr. Harris wandered over from next door, leaning on the railing. "Looks like you got your place back," he said with a small smile. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Feels good." "You know," Mr. Harris added, "you might have done more than just save your cabin. You might have saved the whole community from her." Daniel thought about that for a moment. He hadn't set out to be a hero, but if standing up for himself helped others, then maybe it was worth all the trouble, as the last light of day faded over the water. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the cool evening breeze. For the first time in months, the lake was quiet again. No shouting, no threats, no HOA games. Just the sound of crickets and the gentle lap of the waves. And Daniel knew one thing for sure. No one was ever going to take his cabin from him again.